They don't want you to know the truth.
Hey everybody, welcome to Disrupt the Chaos. We're glad to be back. We are on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. And tonight we're going to have as our guest Drew Dixon, a silence breaker who bravely spoke about the sexual assault and rape and harassment that she suffered from, not victimized, but suffered from, Russell Simmons. But of course, we're going to start our show with just giving a little roundup of what we've seen happening today as George Floyd had his last memorial service and in about a half an hour ago has been laid to rest. So we want to show some video. Yeah, let's show the George Floyd clip and then I'll speak a little bit and then we'll go right to Drew.
Hello, my name is Brookwood. George Floyd, and I can breathe. As long as I'm breathing, justice will be served for a period. First off, I want to thank all of you for coming out to support George Perry Floyd. My uncle was a father, brother, uncle, and a cousin to many. Spiritually grounded, an activist. He always moved people with his words. Their officer showed no remorse while watching my uncle's soul leave his body. He begged and pleaded many times just for you to get up, but you just pushed harder. Why must this system be corrupt and broken? Laws were already put in place for the African-American system to fail. And these laws need to be changed. No more hate crimes, please. Someone said, make America great again. But when has America ever been great? Those 4 officers were literally on him for 9 minutes, and none of them showed they have a heart or soul. This is not just murder, but a hate crime. I share happy memories with my uncle. Now that's all I have, are memories. I still can't pull myself together to how he was calling my grandma a name. I believe my grandmother was right there with open arms saying, come home, baby, you shouldn't feel this pain. No one should feel this pain. My most favorite memory with my uncle was when he paid me to scratch his head after long days of work. When he arrived at home, we even created a song about it called Scratch My Head, yeah. But after that, I knew he was a comedian. He always told me, baby girl, you're going to go so far with that beautiful smile and brains of yours. Another favorite memory is when me and my grandmother was so worried. I mean, she was crying. All I remember is me saying, Granny, it's okay, we'll find a way. But I wasn't entirely sure about how we were going to get to my uncle's PJ's wedding. We had no way to contact anyone, but here comes my uncle busting through the door like Superman. I was young, by the way, probably 10 or 11. My grandmother was also handicapped, and he had this big truck we had to ride in. I was wondering, how was my grandmother going to get in that truck? But he just placed it in the truck like it was light work. I never questioned anyone's strength. But it was unbelievable how my uncle and grandmother broke their backs to always see their children smile and made a way when it seemed impossible. Quote, Tupac, I'm sorry, y'all. Changes. You see, the old way wasn't working, so it's on us to do what we got to do to survive. America, it is time for a change. Even if it shall begin with more protests, no justice, no peace. My brother and basically my other mom tells me this all the time, but God sits high, but he looks low. Thank you, Houston. It's always love in the hometown.
Yeah, it's funny. I was hoping that our producer time would play. So I found that, especially as a young person. So not being a young person for her as a young person. So I was glad that be very clear on the dance. I was hoping that that our producer time would play because obviously she's one of the younger families and is a listening to many people around the country. And also, I'm not really just family I don't live in New York City. I live in upstate New York, and the Wi-Fi here is pretty horrible, and I can't do anything about it. So you know, with the technical difficulties, or you're not going to, it's just what happens when we don't even have 3G Wi-Fi in the city of Albany, New York, which speaks to a host of other issues. But I did want to bring up some things that were said today, and then we'll bring on Drew Dixon. So there's 3 articles that I printed out today, and I think anyone who's an organizer or a activist or has been in the movement for a long time would be like, of course they would do this, and we wouldn't know until somebody reported it. But during the first days of the uprising in Minneapolis, Minnesota state troopers were actually puncturing the tires of numerous vehicles of people who were protesting. So, it kind of just shows the craziness and wickedness of the system. And 45 apparently is going to deliver a presidential speech, but it's being written by Stephen Miller, who is like the most white supremacist of Trump's cabinet. He's the one that has come up with caging children, the wall, and all of that. And I actually think if they were politically smart, which they're not, they would just shut up and not give that speech, because that is just going to ignite more fury. And it just absolutely makes no sense. But at this point, we're dealing with deranged maniacs, so nothing they do makes sense. But I do think that we need to watch out for that, because we're going to have to fight back just on a counter narrative itself. And as George Floyd was being memorialized and was being laid to rest, 45 was tweeting about that the Buffalo protests, his name, we have it now, is Martin Giorgino, who has been a longtime activist and organizer in Buffalo, New York. 45 was tweeting that he's an Antifa provocateur, and that what we saw on TV is not what really happened, and that he got this from some right-wing conspiracy theory site, and he protested Buffalo protesters shoved by police could be an Antifa provocateur. 75-year-old Martin Giorgino was pushed away after appearing to scan police communications in order to black out the equipment. I watched. He fell harder than he was pushed, was aiming scanner. This is a setup. What else can you say about that? I just think it's important that sometimes we report on these crazy tweets. But then it's also like, I don't know, y'all. Like, time right now is moving fast, but it seems almost suspended. And every time we're trying to do something or have like a little bit of respite, we're not getting it. And you're tweeting this as a man is being buried and mourned by not just people in the United States of America, but people from all over the world. I watched the whole service today. And for me, one of the most moving parts was when they read a letter from the president of Ghana. And to paraphrase the letter, what the president of Ghana was saying was, you are us, you're our people, you were taken and dispersed. And he was saying about a street that has already been renamed in George Floyd's honor, and about a statue they're going to build. But also there were solidarity from all over the world, from Luisa, Puerto Rico, to Venezuela, to Cuba, to Greece. London was amazing to watch this weekend, because they were not only protesting, they were knocking down statues and throwing them in the Thames River, which I was like, this is fascinating. Let's do that to all the statues we have. In fact, we have one here in Albany, New York, of a white slave master, and we need to take that one down too. South Africa, New Zealand, Australia. I mean, this weekend was really incredible to see how the international community has been rallying around not just George Floyd, but just seeing the violence and the hypocrisy of the United States of America. And people globally also knew that they had to stand with this family who is really grieving and hasn't really been allowed to grieve, because everything's been so public, So I want to show you a clip of our protests here on Saturday. Here in Albany, New York, we have had several rallies and protests, but this Saturday was led by young people from one of our sponsors, an organization called Youth FX that uses film and media to really empower young people. My daughter Alicia has been in the program now for over 3 years, and they pulled off just an amazing, beautiful day that started with a rally with hundreds of people, which in Albany, if you get 200 or 300 people, that is huge here. And then, of course, the young people marched and protested. And on June 16th, we're actually going to be having a huge upstate-wide protests and march here in Albany in front of the governor's mansion. So there'll be people coming from Buffalo and Rochester, Utica, New Paltz, Kingston, Cayuga. I mean, there's so many cities between here and the border of Canada, which Buffalo is, Potsdam and all these places. So that'll be June 16th. We'll talk about that more. But I did want to show this clip of my daughter speaking at that rally.
So before I start the chant, I just want to say that we are out here today to help support these innocent lives that have been killed on the hands of the police. That shouldn't have happened. And today we are not going to let that happen. We are going to speak. We are going to protest our rights, because people love to talk about how disrespectful the riots are, how burning stuff down isn't the way. But the only way we got these police officers arrested was by burning stuff down. And you know what I say? We can read. And what I say normally is, yes, we can rebuild buildings, but we can't rebuild people's innocent lives. So as a youth, as a Black Puerto Rican, as a person of color, as a young person, and I just want to speak out to know what's right from wrong, and we need to make a change. We need to speak out. We need people to hear our voices. And I don't know about y'all, but the governor's mansion's right there, and he has not come out this house. He lives across the street from one of the lowest places in Albany, New York of poverty, and he has not said nothing. He is sitting in his house, sitting on his throne, not doing anything. So if we need to bring him out,
yes,
we need to bring him out today.
yes.
I say we bring him out today. All right. So as young people, as well as young kids my age, 15 and up, we need to make posters. We need to sign petitions. We need to go live. We need to do art. We need to do music. We need to record. We need to make film. Even if you're not able to leave the house, even if you're not able to physically get out of your apartment, you can still make a stand. You can still write. You can still do art. You can still speak for what's right. Yes. So, and for the adults, for the elders, as for the adults and for the elders, we need y'all. We need y'all here. We need your guidance. We need your wisdom. We need y'all more than you think. And as for white allies, we need y'all here. We need your support. We need y'all to stand your ground as well. And if you're not here to support us, then move out the way. That's what I say. So, of course, Black Lives Matter, no justice, no peace. So I'm going to be starting with this chant. It's a call and response. So it's a Sada Shakur chant that me and my people did down back in LA. So if y'all could just respond when I say it. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. It is our duty to win. It is our duty to love and support one another. It is our duty to love and support one another. It is our duty to fight for our chains.
Off chain.
Well, our hearts. But, yeah. But thank y'all. Black Lives Matter, no justice, no peace. Please keep speaking out. Please keep speaking out. Thank y'all.
Well, yep, that was my daughter. I tell people being justice parent her well, but she was raised by men. So yeah, let's take some comments from folks while we wait for our guest tonight, Dixon, to oh, people are just giving us I see true. People are just giving us love. Thank you. Right. Yes. And yes. So that's great. And thank you. So I see Drew is on, so let's just get right into it. We're gonna play a video clip and then we're gonna talk to Drew and I'll wait for my comments until she comes on.
Yeah, this is a demo. Yeah. I think actually Biggie gave me this. At the time, Biggie lived around the corner. He was trying to be a rapper. I was trying to be a rap A&R person. We were all trying to be something.
Drew was a young, powerful something who cared so much about this music.
And so when Def Jam called me, I was like, Russell Simmons wants to offer you this job as the director of A&R at Def Jam. I could not have scripted it better.
That's one of the beautiful things about the music industry. There was a lot of mobility for women, but at the same time, there was tremendous amount of sexual harassment.
You didn't get a lot of sympathy for that. That was considered the price of admission.
I didn't tell that many people about what happened with Russell. He just grabbed me. He just grabbed me. And I'm saying no. I was reduced to nothing in that moment. Nothing about anything that makes me who I am mattered.
I had asked her, do you want to go to the police? She was like, no one's going to take me seriously. Who's going to believe me?
If white women are not believed, what do you think is happening to Black women in America when we come forward with stories about sexual violence?
I don't have a stitch of violence in me. I would never hurt anybody.
You're worried as a Black woman that you'll say something that will have consequences that you hadn't anticipated.
He's the king of hip hop. The Black community will hate my guts. I didn't want to let the culture down. I love the culture.
It's a terrible burden to bear, to know that you might still be judged as somehow being a traitor.
The New York Times called me and said there were other women, but they won't go on the record unless I go on the record. But I'm terrified of the backlash.
We need to be able to make sure that a broader group of women are introduced into the public consciousness.
This is so emblematic of what happens to women routinely. It's a loss for all of us. It really, really is.
I've been alone for 22 years. I thought it was just me.
To go through the assault and then the coming forward.
Everybody was taught things happen, you just didn't talk about it. And so I just always put on this front.
Every woman's story deserves to be heard.
I've been a victim for 22 years. I'm tired of being a victim.
Normally I wouldn't read a full bio, and it's actually not as long as it should be, but I do want to read Drew Dixon's biography, because after I saw the documentary at a screening that Joan Morgan had, I went home that night and I do a lot of Instagram lives. I'm usually either really angry or despondent, but in this one I was pretty much hysterically crying at like 3 a.m. in the morning, because not only was it an insight into Drew, I remember something really powerful about the documentary. And I think Kiana Mayo said it when she said, hip hop lost Drew Dixon. Where would the culture be if she had been able to stay in it? And then part of it was also, I had to really like interrogate myself and look at the times, especially when I was around a lot of hip hop politics and hip hop musicians. And I'm like, was I that woman that also was emboldening patriarchy? Was I that woman that was telling all these men, like, you cannot do this to women? If you're going to do this, I'm not going to roll with you. And I want to think I am. And I had obviously been in some spaces where I had intervened and all that. But I think at one point, I had to admit to myself, and I always tell people this, like, people like us, we like the limelight. We like, being around crowds and, all of that social interaction. And part of it is because culture is capital, and it brings you cultural capital to say, oh, I was at this show, I helped produce that, I'm in that documentary and all of that. So I felt that I had to really like interrogate myself. And the next day I did a lot of writing for one day when my book comes out, about how I want to apologize to any woman or non-gender conforming person that was in any time hurt when I was there and should have intervened. And I really think that we as women always do that anyway. And at this point, I'm really too tired to be telling 50-year-old men the right thing to do, right? So Drew Dixon is the accomplished former vice president of A&R at Arista Records, a former director of A&R at Def Jam, the former general manager of John Legend's independent label Homeschool Records. She is a preeminent creative authority who has produced hit records with performers like Carlos Santana, Aretha Franklin, Whitney Houston, Estelle, Lauryn Hill, Monica, Deborah Cox, Method Man, The Notorious B.I.G., Q-Tip, Brand Nubian, CeeLo Green, Mary J. Blige, Kanye West, and so many more. Currently, she is the founder of the independent record label, The Ninth Floor, and tech-enabled beauty startup, Everything Did. She's a co-creator of Reciprocity, a scripted television series in development with executive producer Ben Silverman. She's a graduate of Stanford University and Harvard Business School. In December 2017, Drew broke her silence in the New York Times about sexual assault and harassment in the music industry. Drew lives in Brooklyn, New York, with her 2 children and their cats. This is funny, George and Wheezy. And just apart from the New York Times, I encourage everybody to read the entire piece. In 1995, Drew Dixon was working her dream job as an executive at Def Jam Records Recordings, helping to oversee a chart-topping album and single by Method Man and Mary J. Blige, which it is hands down my favorite hip hop song ever. If you don't know it, then go find it. But the Method Man and Mary J. Blige, I like play it every day. But as her star rose, Ms. Dixon, then 24, was spiraling into depression because of prolonged and aggressive sexual harassment by her direct supervisor, Russell Simmons, the rap mogul and co-founder of the label. On work calls, he would talk graphically about how she aroused him at a staff meeting. He asked her to sit on his lap. He regularly exposed himself to her. Late that year, Mr. Simmons raped her in his downtown Manhattan apartment, Ms. Dixon said. She quit Def Jam soon after, and I was broken, she said. So thank you, Drew, for being with us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for that introduction, and just thank you for your advocacy and like everything you do and represent. I'm so grateful to be here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so grateful for you because yeah, hip hop did lose something when it lost you. And I actually don't even think it could ever recover at this point. You know, I'm at the point with a lot of elements within hip hop culture that, I mean, maybe I'm the old person in the room now, but I'm like, nah, this is not what we were trying to do, especially as hyper capitalists.
No.
With that said, how did you come to the decision that you would tell your story? Because in the documentary itself, we're all watching you, and then about 3/4 way into the documentary, we also see that at that time you decided to divorce your husband, and you allowed the cameras to capture what was a probably horrible moment for you, your children, and you're getting divorced while going through all this. So how did you come to go on the record?
Well, interestingly, the decision to go on the record was kind of one of the final straws in the conversations with my now ex-husband. You know, I mean, our marriage was on life support for many years, so it's not like it was the single thing, but it was definitely the final sort of tense conversation was first the decision to go on the record, and then the argument really that did it was the decision to do the documentary. So, you know, it was not an easy choice. My decision to come forward was something I never would have imagined. I mean, even like in October of 2017, I would have said, absolutely not. No way is that ever going to happen. You know, when the Me Too stories started to kind of, you know, fan across the headlines, starting with the Harvey Weinstein stories and then expanding to other people. As a woman and as a rape survivor, I was very gratified that these women were being seen and heard, and that the starting point of the conversation was to give them the benefit of the doubt, and then obviously appropriately to kind of back out the story from there and to do the kind of rigorous investigation that, you know, any sort of significant news story calls for, but that it was foregrounding their voices and their experiences. And that was like unheard of to me. I'd never seen that before in my whole life. And I was so happy for them. And I was also kind of like, go white women, like, yay, that's awesome for you. Like, I'm so glad. And like, this is like good for me as a survivor, but also like, I don't know that this really applies to me as a Black woman. And I was also kind of okay with that because I didn't want to have to be forced to make a decision about what I would do if it ever did apply to me. And I didn't think anyone would ever care about Black survivors, or even like Black people at all. Like, I just thought this was going to be like, you know, big white directors and big movie stars. And, you know, then, you know, Brett Ratner was named. Brett Ratner is a big director, but he got his start really making music videos for Russell and with Russell, kind of through Russell. And that's when I started to get that like kind of knot in my stomach. I felt like this story could expand to include Russell, and that could force me to have to make a choice that I'd really rather not make. And then 2 women came forward and accused Brett and Russell, and Russell called them liars. And he said that he was collateral damage in a wonderful like awakening that he supported, but he did yoga and was a vegan and therefore could never hurt a fly. And that's when I just happened to be talking to a mom whose daughter goes to school with my daughter, I'd known for like 10 years, who's a documentary filmmaker, Liz Garbus. And I was just talking with her like as a mom, you know, before like a parents' night event. And I alluded to the fact that I knew Russell was guilty because I had my own experience with him. And she asked if I wanted to be introduced to Jodi Kantor. I like borderline thought she was joking. I was like, no, like I didn't know she knew Jodi Kantor, you know? So then I saw her like maybe a week later at Parents' Day, just coincidentally, by which time he called the women liars, like outright in his statement. That's when I asked Liz to introduce me to Jodi Kantor. And that's when she connected me with her husband, who executive produces documentaries and was executive producing a Me Too documentary with Amy Ziering and Kirby Dick. They asked if I would willing to let them follow me with a camera, you know, as I told my story off the record to the New York Times, and as I decided about going on the record with my story. And, you know, I've done some independent filmmaking in my life, and I know what it's like to try to put it all together. And I you know, I knocked on doors as a kid and campaigned for my parents and consider myself sort of an activist in my spirit. And I didn't want to say no because I knew if I said no, there was no way to kind of recreate that moment. Like you couldn't unscramble that egg. And they said I could do it, but not sign the release. So I could always change my mind. Like if I didn't go on the record, they would destroy the footage. You know, they could also, whatever, I could decide later. And I also, to be completely honest with you, was very scared. I was at this point like a stay-at-home mom. And, you know, I was going up against not one, but two very powerful media moguls because I also came forward about sexual harassment by L.A. Reid, who's another huge, you know, executive in the entertainment industry. And I was afraid that if somehow they found out I was considering doing this, like maybe one of my corroborating sources said something inadvertently, I was afraid like something bad might happen to me or they might try to intimidate me in some way and scare me. And I didn't want like no one to know what I was doing in case something bad happened to me. And I thought, well, worst case scenario, if there's like a film person following me around and I should like trip and fall, somebody will at least be the wiser. And so between that and also just wanting to document the experience just in case I did go through with it, I decided, and because they were cool and let me, you know, do it without committing to it by signing the release, I felt like it was the right thing to do. And that's really how I became part of a documentary that then shifted over time to a documentary they wanted to sort of change and focus to my story and the story of the Russell Simmons survivors. And I said yes for like a day, and then I said no, because it was one thing for me to be a small part of a documentary about the sort of Hollywood Me Too movement, and I could sort of be a Black woman, and I'd introduce them to Sherry Hines by then, and I thought it was important for Black women to be a part of it. But I didn't necessarily feel comfortable with white filmmakers telling the story of the Russell Simmons survivors. I was very concerned about our story being told and framed in the white gaze, given the stakes and the layers and layers of issues that Black women who come forward face that are not part of the experience of white women coming forward. And it was actually the anxiety that I had about that and the back and forth that I had with the filmmakers about that actually kind of changed the scope of the film itself. Like they were so, I think, taken by the intensity of my fear about being blackballed and about making Black men and boys more vulnerable to this dangerous, you know, myth that they're dangerous, violent predators, which puts my own 13-year-old son at risk, you know, and many men I love at risk. When they started to realize that I was like not joking and I was really serious, they started to do their own homework and they realized that it was important for people like them to understand the double bind that Black women face. And
yeah,
that's why.
Can you give me a second? Let me just explain to people what just happened. And you were still talking, so it was recording, so thank God. But the Wi-Fi happens to be out right now in the whole part of my city. But we're back on because I'm turning everything off but this connection. So what I want to tell everybody is that everybody still heard you.
Oh.
So it was just me, and now I think we'll be stable. Okay. I got what you said at the end. I did just want to ask you if you could tell people who might not know who Jodi Kantor is. Okay. Yeah. And then continue with what you were saying.
Okay. Jodi Kantor is a reporter at the New York Times, and she was one of the two reporters at the Times, she and Megan Twohey, who wrote the first Weinstein story in the Times, along with Ronan Farrow and Jane Meyer, who wrote the Weinstein article in the New Yorker magazine. And they actually all went on to win Pulitzers for that reporting. But this is before they won the Pulitzer. This is, you know, maybe a month and a half after the Weinstein story. That's when I was introduced to Jodi via email and declined to even like, you know, I congratulated her on her work and thanked her for her work, but declined to talk with her myself until Russell called the first two women that came forward about him a liar. Then I agreed to meet with her off the record. Then after I met with her off the record, Jenny Lumet came forward with her story of having been raped by Russell Simmons. And that was a huge factor in my decision to going on the record. It was Jenny coming forward as a Black woman. The New York Times told me there were 3 other women, 2 of whom had been raped, all of whom were Black, who also were aware that I existed, but they wouldn't go on the record if I didn't go on the record. Like, they wanted to go in a group. And sort of the combination of all those things led me to feel like I wouldn't ever want to look back at that moment and feel like I had an opportunity to be brave and do the right thing, and I didn't. And so I did it, I did it. And it was not, I was about to start a company, a startup. I'd been raising money, which is very hard as a Black woman. And it was not a good time, but there's never really a good time, to sort of stop what you're doing and like call out injustice. I mean, there isn't. It's not convenient for anybody out marching the streets right now with masks on. So, I did it because I felt like if I didn't, I wasn't sure who else would. And I wanted to back up Jenny, and I wanted to back up Carrie Clausen-Kaligi and the other woman. And I thought it was also really important for Black women to be seen and heard before this window closed. And I had this feeling this window is not going to stay open for very long. So this is my moment. And I think I thought that I would leave the information out in the world and go back to my life. I didn't realize that the information being out in the world would change me, because it would force me to include this part of my story in the way I saw myself. And I'd really avoided like telling myself I was a rape victim. It was sort of, well, if I don't tell anybody else, then I don't have to tell myself.
Yeah.
I'm fine. And then all of a sudden it just like wiped me out. Like, it brought me to my knees. And that was also part of it. My husband, who's a very nice man, did not know how to show up for me and was just very afraid and worried of the implications for all of us. And I had finally found the courage after 22 years to just say it out loud. And I didn't, it's almost like that moment when you're like riding your bike and you look back at your like mom and she looks more afraid than you are, and suddenly you lose control of the bike. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of like, I got this. I'm not turning back around. I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to just find out what it's like on the other side. Because this 22 years of making myself small to fit into this lie to cover up his crime, I'm really done with that. And so that's what happened.
And before Jenny came out with her story, and as usual, what was disheartening was just the amount of our own people calling her a liar, like he would never do that. And I'm like, in every hip hop circle I've been in, nobody really had that many good things to say about Russell Simmons on the real, and obviously there had been people saying, he has sexually assaulted women, he has raped women and this stuff. And then we got hit right before in 2016 with, or 2015 actually, with the young man, Robert, coming out around what Africa Bambaataa did to him. And then it got into this whole, well, all y'all trying to do is bring down Black men. Why don't you bring down the white men first? And we're like, it's all falling apart. Like, it's all, and even then I was just pissed off. I'm like, y'all knew he was capable. Like, it wasn't a secret.
Right.
And this type of man that was completely misogynistic, like, and that is one of the traits of someone who sexually assaults and is a rapist. They're misogynistic, but they code it.
Russell has this really unthreatening, yoga, soft-spoken, self-deprecating persona that belies this really cold, dark, violent predator. And even for all of the times he crossed the line in these with language and even like, in physical ways, exposing himself, I'd answer phones for almost 2 years before I got the Def Jam job. I mean, this was the job of, I mean, I wanted a job at like Tommy Boy, Def Jam. There were like 3 or 4 companies like that would have been the dream. And Def Jam was the dream.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to blow it. Russell was complicated in the sense that he gave me opportunities. When I said I heard that interlude and thought it should be a duet with Mary J. Blige, he let me do that. You know, he gave me the show soundtrack to make. And so I didn't want to burn the bridge. I finally have the dream mentor. And when he crossed the line, he would always sheepishly apologize when I'm like, no, we're not doing that. Come on, yo, like, chill. He'd be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm an idiot. Oh my God, don't hate me. Like, Drew, you're so smart. You're so cool. You're great. Like, I don't want you to be mad. I don't want you to be mad. I was like, oh my God, no, it's cool. Now I'm making him feel better. Oh my God, no, it's cool. It's cool. Like, just don't do that again. And let's just focus on the records and my checklist of questions for you. And like, I'm not mad. I just want you to like focus on work. Okay. And then he'd even like leave voicemails, like, because Russ was like one of the only people at the time with a cell phone. So like he would already have left a message by the time you got home. You know, don't hate me, money. Don't sue me for sexual harassment. Like, you know, I think you're doing a great job. And, you know, and then I was like, you know, we're cool. Like, because I didn't want to like lose the one, like the dream mentor. It's not like there's another Russell Simmons. It's not like, you know, I mean, I had a very specific job reporting to a very specific person in a very specific moment in history.
Right.
I couldn't just swap him out for somebody. There's nobody else like him. And he was really giving me stuff to do. That was like giving me the opportunity to prove that I was a great music producer. And so I thought if I could just keep redirecting him, because he was never like scary. He was inappropriate and apologetic. And it wasn't until he got me alone in his bedroom, and I didn't know I was going to be in his bedroom. I thought when he said, come upstairs and get a demo.
Right.
He called to order a car, which I'd heard. I now wonder if that was an act. But I thought the car was on its way, so I wouldn't be up for very long. I got in the elevator. I wasn't even sure when I got in the elevator if we were going to go to his home office, which was not even his apartment in the same building, or go to his home. And then we get there and he goes a separate way. So I'm also thinking, I'm fine. He's not even following me. I'm good. And he's kind of giving me directions from off, you know, like out of my field of vision. Go straight, make a left, make a right. There's a CD player on your left. So I can hear him, but I can't see him. But I'm like actually feeling more safe because of that. And he's like, there's something in the CD tray. I opened the tray. I remember it taking me a long time to open the tray because he's rich. So the CD player was like Bose or something. It didn't say like on, you know, slick. So I was like, you know, I opened the tray. Nothing's in the tray. I'm like, there's nothing here. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. You know what? It must be on the shelf. I'm like, what's it called? He's like, well, what's on the shelf? Like, this is all from, I'm reading names. I'm saying the name. He's like, it's not that. I pick him another and I'm reading. And again, now I'm thinking the car is probably here. Like I need to hurry. And then the next thing I know, he's like literally grabbing me and he's naked and he's wearing a condom and he's got the coldest, most cruel, diabolical look in his face. And this was violent. I physically fought him. I kicked, I screamed, I cried, I begged. And then I had like sort of like a dissociative experience where it says in the film, I say in the film that I blacked out, but it was more like everything went black, but I could sort of still hear things, you know, I was like there, but I wasn't there, you know, and then all of a sudden I came back totally, I think his cell phone rang. And that's when it was sort of like, anyway, so I don't know. I'm not sure what the question was.
No. And you know, I think there's two things here that people have to realize. You were 24.
Mm-hmm.
You were in what is now known as the best era of hip hop, that golden age, as a lot of the brothers and sisters like to say. And Russell Simmons was everything in hip hop, you know, and
I also had the #1 R&B album in the country at the time. that I
Right.
took the credits because I didn't get credit for the Mary J. Blige Method Man duet. Somebody
Yeah.
else turned in the credits, and I didn't know that wasn't like obvious that I should get the credit. So this time I typed the credits, and it was the #1 album. And when he said to come up to get the demo while he ordered me a car, he also told me how Polygram, which was the parent company, was really impressed by me and really happy that this soundtrack had been so successful, and they knew that I'd put it together. So I'm really thinking he sees me now, finally, as a peer. Surely I'm now too important to him professionally for him to compromise it with that silly whatever thing he does that I don't want to do, that I told him I don't want to do, that he always apologizes for. By bringing up the album being #1, it was like the exact right thing to disarm me. Like, and to mention that the parent company, I'm going to be honest, the white parent company was aware of me. It made me think that I had sort of transcended being totally dependent on him and this small pond, because I was now registering on the big pond, in the big pond. And therefore, as a smart business person, which I thought he was, given how successful he was, he wouldn't want to mess that up while I've got the #1 R&B album in the country. We were co-executive producers. And so I really thought I was safe because I had that credit. I honestly did. And I wasn't.
And then, after he raped you, did you, in the following weeks, I don't think you ever reported or talked to anyone, right? Not even
people.
You did
I didn't report it. So I had a friend who was staying on my couch. Some like drama with the ex-boyfriend. So she was like, nah, I'm gonna stay on your couch. And so she was on my couch, and I came home. I ended up walking home, and I got in the shower with all my clothes on, and I took a cold shower. It was like, I almost like wanted to wash myself down the drain,
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember if she came in and was like, what are you doing? Or after I got out of the shower, I woke her up on the couch. We then talked. I told her what happened right away. We talked about calling the police. We thought that no one would believe me because he's Russell Simmons. I don't know if we talked about Anita Hill and Desiree Washington, but I certainly thought about Anita Hill and Desiree Washington, especially Desiree Washington. Why did we go upstairs in the first place?
Yeah.
So we thought it probably wasn't a good idea. We called a male friend and talked with him about it. And should we call the police? And he agreed we probably shouldn't, because the other thing is, my mom had been the mayor of DC until like maybe, that was 1995. So her term ended in 95, in January of 95. So I knew this would be a news story.
Right.
Who my mom was and who he was. And I was like, no. If there's a police report, I'm on the cover of Jet. I don't want to be on the cover of Jet.
Mm-hmm.
Not for this. Absolutely not. That's all anyone will ever know about me. And they will hate me. Russell is fighting to put hip hop on the map. I don't want to undermine that. I don't want that to be what anyone thinks of when they think of me. I'm not doing it. And then I went and talked the next day to my mentor, this guy named Gary Harris, who worked at EMI, and his intern Miguel is in the film because he was in the room when I told Gary. And again, we talked about, should I go to the police? And I was like, no one's going to believe me. And this is all anyone will ever know about me. And so I thought I stayed home for like a week. My friend Denise was like, it was a month. You stayed home for a month. And then it's when I went back to the office that I ran into Russell. That's when he asked me to sit on his lap.
Oh my God.
And I was just like, oh my God, he thinks I'm that girl now. I'm not that person. I didn't sign up for this. I don't want anything to do with you, like at all. I don't want to even look at you. And then I submitted a handwritten letter of resignation with scratch outs. I was too physically weak to start the paper again. I did write 2 copies. I dropped off one at the front desk of his building because he didn't even have an office at Def Jam. I mean, he worked from that home office. I dropped it off with the doorman. And then I gave the other one to Lior. And then Lior called Russell in and they met with me. And they tried to talk me out of it because by then
you're talking about Leo Cohen, right?
Cohen, who was the president of Def Jam and went on to become the chairman of Warner Music Group. And they tried to talk me out of it. And then finally Lior just stopped talking and he said to Russell, stop talking. I see what happened here. I get it. You did this. She's gone. Let her go.
That's so, I mean, for you to even have to be back in a room with him and then Leo Cohen, who from everything I ever heard is not a nice person at all, is intimidating. And when he had that kind of power in hip hop, destroyed, you know, certain people's careers. But when you walked out that day, okay, so you're a month later, it's almost like time is suspended.
Yeah.
You have to go through that. Then you actually have to walk out. What did you do after? Is this when you just kind of extricated yourself from the entire culture?
The whole business. I was like trying to get into PhD programs. I was like, maybe I'll just write about hip hop and I'll just love it from afar. But it was like now it's January and all the like deadlines were like December 15th or January 1st. Like, I'd missed all the deadlines. So I couldn't do that. You know, I actually literally thought about like moving to like a farm and picking tomatoes. I'm not kidding. I actually went to a bartending class. I was like, maybe I'll be a bartender because then I'll be behind the bar and I'll be in charge. And then I realized the only drink I even had heard of was a grasshopper and I didn't know it was in it. I was like, no, I shouldn't do this. I was like, I don't know what to do with myself. Meanwhile, you know, rent is still due. I had Stanford student loans that were still due. I mean, the bills don't stop coming just because I quit my job, but the bills kept coming. And the album was still like in the top 10. And so another friend of mine from Def Jam, Jason Jackson, started making calls for me. And he called Elektra, he called Arista, he called all of these places and said, you know, Drew, you've got a hot record and you're the executive producer. You should take these meetings. And I kind of at this point was like, well, I need money. So I need a job. And I like went in like with an attitude, like I'd gone from like wide-eyed and hopeful to like glaring at like Clive Davis in these meetings. And what really melted me about Clive was he's a music man. And I'm like sitting there with my arms folded, like sour, like hate the music industry. I think I said the record business is no place for someone who loves music. Like I was just like bitter. And then he started playing me music, like some Sarah McLachlan thing he was working on. I think he was working on The Preacher's Wife. And I just melted. I love music. And we started talking about music. And I was like, oh my God, this is great. I could do this. And that's how I ended up working for Clive. And I worked for Clive for 4.5 years and I was safe. I was protected by Clive. But then I also had so many hits there. I introduced Lauryn Hill to Aretha Franklin and they made A Rose Still a Rose. Then I introduced Wyclef to Whitney and they made My Love Is Your Love. And, you know, I introduced Wyclef to Carlos Santana and they made Maria Maria. You know, I worked on The Boy Is Mine. I worked on Heartbreak Hotel. You know, I found Montel Jordan, who I knew from Def Jam, brought me Nobody's Supposed to Be Here. And I told Clive I thought Deborah Cox should sing it, which was the #1 R&B single for 16 weeks, which broke a record. Like I had a hot hand. And when Clive was ousted 4.5 years later, I was going to go with him. And then we actually got into an argument because he wasn't focusing on the Q-Tip album. And I was really mad at him because I was like, look, I found all these hits for your artists and Q-Tip is an artist I signed. And I know you've been ousted, but like, you're going to be okay. You're Clive Davis. I just need you to focus on Breathe and Stop, please. And that became an argument. And then I decided, you know what, maybe it's time for me to stop hiding behind Clive Davis. I'm going to stay here with L.A. Reid, who I'd known for 10 years, who'd always been respectful of me. I knew Erica. I think he and Erica were either recently married or engaged. I knew her. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to just do 18 months with L.A. Reid rather than 5 more years with Clive. And then in the meantime, I started to set up a label. It was called Possum. I signed Alice Smith to my label, the singer, because L.A. passed on her. So anyone he auditioned on that wasn't big enough for me to like, you know, if they were sort of a baby artist like Alice Smith, I was like, okay, I have a label. Do you want to wait 18 months and do this with me? And she said yes. And I was getting my confidence back. And I was like, okay, it's finally my turn to be like a Puffy or a Russell or an Arnie Harrell. And then the harassment started with LA. And then I just started to think I was a fool. And all of the unprocessed trauma from Russell just came back. And I started to feel worthless all over again. And L.A. Reid didn't physically assault me, but he did the opposite of what Russell did professionally. If I didn't meet him at the hotel, and I never met him at the hotel, there were penalties. This artist, Toya, that I had, went from being a priority to being crossed off the list. You know, the Kanye West audition was a disaster that deserved me being like told I sucked at my job for 45 minutes because Kanye was such a bad artist that I must be crazy. The John Legend auditions that he just scheduled and canceled and scheduled and blew off. It was like I was just getting, and it was clear that at a certain point I was going to have to show up at the Four Seasons, or I was going to literally be completely dead in the water professionally.
And look, let me say this, because somebody just said because of the power you had. I mean, the fact that Kanye West and John Legend are who they are now is part and parcel because of you.
No, I mean, they got their own deals now.
No, but you said that, I mean, not you, but you show in the film how L.A. Reid he began to penalize you for bringing artists.
Yeah.
We obviously saw could be great artists with you working with them.
Yeah. John and Kanye had enough momentum without me. I mean, Kanye first, and then John really through Kanye, that's why I didn't sign them to my label. Like Alice Smith was a baby enough artist that I was able to ask her to wait and sign with me. And then I just ripped up her deal and let her go do her thing when I went to business school. It was clear to me that Kanye was too hot as a producer for me to expect him. I told him in my office, I said, you're going to get a deal. It's fine. It's really not you. It's me. I won't get into it, but you're going to win so many Grammys, you won't know where to put them. You're fine. And he had enough momentum that he took like 5 other meetings, and I'm sure he had a deal within like a month. Like he was already hot as a producer. So there was no way. I was just able to convince him to come to me first because I met him through Londell McMillan actually, and we clicked. So the real thing with Kanye wasn't that I was the only person in the business that knew he was great, but I had bonded with him enough that I was first in terms of somebody who had the opportunity to sign him. So Kanye was going to be Kanye with or without me, but I lost out on that money. I mean, I would have had a point on that on Kanye's next 7 albums or something.
Yeah.
And I have nothing to show for that. And same with John. So for them, it was more like, that's just wealth that I lost. Forget the career momentum I would have had if I'd gotten to sign Kanye and John. I'd be rich if I'd gotten to sign Kanye and John. And yeah, so.
And I think it's important that you say that because, you know, the society we live in is capitalistic and hyper-capitalistic. A woman's never supposed to be like, yo, I did that. You know, like I was part of that.
Yeah.
I wanted to just backtrack a little bit. After that month that you were processing all of this, after you walked out on Russell Simmons and Lyle Cohen that day, did you seek any mental health? Did your friends say, well, maybe you should see a therapist? Or was it that time period also being young that it's almost like as Black and brown women, we're kind of expected, we've had this traumatic sexual assault by a certain age. Like,
yeah,
that was it. You just had to kind of compartmentalize it. Like, it's there and I'm over here now.
I was already told when I first decided I wanted to make rap records in 1992, coming from Stanford, the mayor's freaking daughter, that I was not tough enough for this industry, that I was out of my mind. Like, who did I think I was? They're going to eat you alive. I was prepared for the misogynistic culture. I was not prepared for the rape part of it. But I also felt like I didn't want anyone to know that this had happened to me. And I was ashamed of myself that I'd even let it happen. You know, you blame yourself. I played that night again and again over in my head, really for 22 years. Why did I didn't know he'd done it to anyone else. So literally when I was reading the New York Times article that my story is in, I like looked up and like gasped and realized there was no CD for the first time in 22 years. When I read the story about the other women that he lured into traps, I realized there was no CD. For 22 years, I literally thought there was a CD. He asked me upstairs in good faith, and somehow he just went crazy and raped me. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't high. I also want to say that. Russell used to have this weird thing where he would give up drinking and drugs from his birthday, which is in the beginning of October, through New Year's Eve. This was in October. He was sober. This was just a premeditated, calculated attack. But until I understood his pattern, I blamed myself. And so I didn't get therapy because I wanted to convince myself that I was fine. I didn't even want to internalize that I was a rape survivor. I didn't even want to. I did call my OBGYN because I'd had a medical procedure a few days before this where they like had to do this like cryogenic thing, like an irregular pap smear. I'm just keeping it extra real. And they, as a preventative measure, they do this thing where they like freeze your like cervix. And I literally had like a pad on that night with like gray discharge. And I was not supposed to wear a tampon or have sex or do anything for 2 weeks. And I actually pointed that out to him when he was like ripping off my clothes, and the pad was there. I was like begging him. I'm like, you could harm me forever. Please, you have to stop. And so then I did call my OBGYN the next day to find out what the repercussions were. And she was like, I can't, we'll just have to wait and see. And I was just sort of like, oh my God, like, am I going to be able to have kids? Like, I didn't know how that worked.
Yeah.
I have 2 children and I had vaginal births and everything went well, you know, but I always wondered about that actually. Would it really have some repercussion for me physically? So other than calling my OBGYN and calling my friends, I called my friends. I actually reassured my friends I was okay. I didn't want them to worry about me. I didn't want them to say anything. And I tried not to tell anybody that knew him independent of me because I didn't want to be seen as a problem.
I mean, how have you been? Have you talked to your children, your children about this or?
Well, so yes, I mean, my kids are 15 and 13 now. They were, gosh, the article came out. They were 12 and 10 when the article came out. I told them I was being interviewed by the New York Times for an article about sexual harassment in the music industry. And then when the story came out and the headline say 3 women accuse Russell Simmons of rape, my daughter was like, this is not what you said. And I wanted to be like, New York Times, I have kids. Did you have to put the R word in the headline? Come on. And then I'm like, oh wait, this is not for my daughter. This is like for the whole world. And they've never read it. You know, they have friends who said they've read it. They have friends. I have friends whose their friends' moms called me and said they read it to their daughters or their sons. My daughter has friends who said they've now seen the movie and they, you know, thought they're like, oh, your mom's amazing. I try not to in any way impose this on them. They saw the camera person in the living room when I was like, you know, in the documentary, and they had strict rules not to film my kids.
Right.
They know that I'm doing it. It's not their favorite thing. They did go to Sundance, and I think it was the first time that they were sort of proud of me and realized that maybe I'm doing something important and I'm not like totally weird and a total loser, you know?
Yeah, which, you know, you're not. But when you were, and you're referring to Sundance this past January, which is the Sundance Film Festival, but also like, you know, one day we're in this phase and 2 days later we're within the Me Too movement, you know, and I don't know how it has felt for you, because Tarana Burke had been doing this work for such a long time. Some of us now, we're like in these mid 40s where we start to be like more real and process things that happened to us when we were within the culture and in our early 20s and all of that. So this Me Too explodes in October 2017. A little less than 3 months later, the article, well, Jenny's article comes out. Then the New York Times. Did you feel, as this moment was happening, did you feel again like lost and ignored, or it was like now everybody knows and I have to? How am I going to deal with my trauma that I feel like you might have still been experiencing?
I was actually hoping that I would continue to be ignored in October, November. I was hoping I could just sort of dip and not have to decide. And that this would be like progress for women in general, but I wouldn't have to be a part of it. When I came forward, I definitely felt like this tremendous burden I'd been carrying that I was so used to carrying was suddenly off of my shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
I realized that I'd been an accomplice after the fact to the cover up by keeping his secret. Like I was out there picking up his bloody gloves for 22 years, making sure that nobody heard anything from me that might get back to him, that might make it seem like I'm out here telling the story. And I realized how much I damaged myself by doing his work for him, and really by doing Ellie Reed's work for him, and finding a way to be in spaces with people and pretending like I'm all good with them and their enablers, like the Leora Cohens of the world and the Julie Greenwalds and those people, and how much that was a real sort of act of self-harm. And to suddenly be relieved of that burden was like so freeing. And that's part of why when I looked at my husband and saw his fear, it like revolted me, because I was so grateful to finally be letting go of my fear that I didn't want to be pulled back into that space. I wanted to keep going. And what I didn't realize is that I would go backwards before I went forward, because I did spend about, looking back now, 6 months, maybe even almost a year, incorporating rape victim into my skin. And actually my self-esteem really dropped dramatically after the New York Times article came out in a lot of ways. So I'm getting like texts and emails from people coming forward. Right. Some of them are not public. Some about the men I've named, some about other men, saying I'm a hero and inspiration. And I'm kind of like saying all the right things, I hope, back to them. And then I'm like, I'm a rape victim. Why do they think I'm anything? Why do they think I'm like, I was just sort of like, I can't explain it. I was just sort of, it's almost like I was back where I left myself in that shower. And I suddenly had to feel all the feelings. And I really felt low. I felt dirty. I felt ashamed, even though in my mind I knew I shouldn't feel any of those things. I did. And I had to kind of let that go through me. It was literally like I had to sweat it out, kind of. And also I'm in this documentary, and then they ask me if I'll be the main subject, as I'm still in the middle of feeling the feelings and trying to feel empowered in my mind, but feeling very low in terms of how I really saw myself. Like now everybody knows I'm a rape victim. Ugh, yuck. Yuck. How do I go forward? And then it started to turn. And one of the turns really was the engagement with the filmmakers around panning out the story and including all of my sisters, the other Russell survivors, and all the Black women and girls who've been unsafe in our bodies since the Middle Passage. And it's really since the other side of it, since we were captured in Africa. That was a beginning of me feeling like I was taking control of my story, because I was turning it into something bigger than just here's what happened to me. It was here's what's happening to all of us.
Right.
And these filmmakers were really listening, and they were really honoring that. And they were really moving with that.
Yeah.
And that was so empowering for me to be part of this film, even though I didn't see it until November, literally, because they were very church and state subject.
Yeah.
Because they didn't, it's their, but I could feel their sort of respect and their acknowledgement. And they were, I introduced them to Joan and Kierna, and then they found, told me about Kimberly Crenshaw and Shanita Hubbard and, the other brilliant women in the film. And that felt like a mission, and that's why when the film almost slipped through our fingers, I found a strength that I didn't know I had, that I don't think I even had 2 years earlier, to say, no, with all due respect, I have tremendous respect for you, Oprah Winfrey, but you don't get to decide if people will get to hear our stories. And you certainly don't get to decide on behalf of all the Black women and girls for whom we're getting 90 minutes out of 400 years to be seen. We're going to get these 90 minutes if I have anything to say or do about it.
No, and when you say that, because once Me Too explodes, but also once, Tarana and everyone around that supports her makes sure that Black women are centered and not erased, even though they continue to be erased. You said you had that year where everybody's like, you're my hero. Thank you for sharing it. And, I think, and not to compare your experience at all, but for me, after Me Too, like for the next couple of years, I began to just vividly more remember when I was molested as a child. Mm-hmm. And I always was like, why do I hate the color yellow? Like, why? And okay. And yellow, why don't you wear yellow? And I'm like, I hate it. I don't know why. And I knew I had to go into therapy because this Me Too moment, I just come back from Puerto Rico after the hurricane. So it's like that Me Too, Black women being erased. Was I part of it? Was I complicit? And I go to my therapist and she says, what color were you wearing when you were molested? I was like, yellow. And she's like, and that's why you hate yellow. Mm-hmm. And I was like, right. Like how the hell at 6 years old and 42 years later, I see it and I hate it. I hate it. I hate the color. It's like seeing the sun. I'm like, this is not. And when I did share my experience last year, the amount of texts were like, you're amazing. You're my Shiro. And I'm like, I don't want to be your fucking Shiro because I was sexually molested, but thank you. But not really. Thanks, but no. It's just like, right. Like, I don't want to get an award for that horrific moment in my life.
Right.
And I think part of it is you want to control your narrative at this point. We don't get the right to control our narrative. It's like, no, you have to now speak up, or no, you have to be like super special, or no, you have to be like more loving and accepting. And this is what justice looks like. And I'm like, maybe for some of us, justice does not look like a trial by the system, or
right.
What can reconciliation be if the person that did that to you, Russell, will never at least apologize.
Right.
Like, I wonder if you go through those days where you're like, dude, just say you're sorry, man. We know why you left the country now. Like, can you just say it? And whatever happens to you, but just, it's kind of like the South African truth and reconciliation. Just say it. Right. Say it. But you said that burden lifted off of you. So when you were at Sundance with your kids and the documentary premieres and you get, I mean, overwhelming. I saw the pictures.
Yeah.
It's like kind of surreal because then you had to come back and it kind of, like you said,
For
felt
sure.
distribution part.
Yeah, Sundance, I have to say, you know, again, I do believe in a divine force, right? And you know, I would never, you know, I say in the film that I couldn't have scripted it better when I got the job at Def Jam. And then I tried to not include being a rape victim in my scripts. Like that was not in the script. So I just decided I won't tell myself, I won't tell anybody else, and I'm fine. And then the Me Too moment happens. And then I suddenly have to tell the world I'm a rape victim. And then the documentary turns into this other documentary, and I had to make another choice. And then I felt so safe and rescued, almost like I did with Clive when Oprah Winfrey joined as the executive producer. Like, now I can just chill over here. She's going to be the champion. I mean, there's no better champion. She's a survivor. She's Oprah Winfrey. There's nobody else like Oprah Winfrey. I can't imagine anyone better. And then she started getting attacked for being a traitor to the race for executive producing this film. I was devastated that she was taking the arrows on our behalf. But I never thought she'd cave. Like literally, and I know she says that's not why she caved, but I'll believe her, fine. But I never thought she'd exit in the middle of the firestorm for whatever reason. Like literally, I was so overwhelmed that like literally I would talk about this with my therapist. And to the point about the Me Too moment, unlocking all of this stuff, I wasn't even seeing my therapist when I decided to go to the New York Times. I'd seen her for several years to work on trauma and the Russell Simmons stuff, but also some childhood stuff. I can sadly check that box as well. Which I also think predisposed me for not knowing that I had a right to draw the line way sooner than I drew the line.
You know what I think about that, Drew, as you finish that point, is that we're told when children, and you know, I struggle with this language piece of molestation, but we're told that they're being groomed, but also like adult women can be groomed. That's like what Russell groomed you. You know what I'm saying? That's what he did. Because you're like,
down, he kicked the tire.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he finally got a moment for the, yeah. So I've been in therapy about that stuff. Actually, my therapy was really more like the other stuff. And my therapist kept saying, do you want to talk about this Russell Simmons? I was like, no, I don't want to talk about that. And then I spoke at the New York Times, and my best friend in Oakland, she's like, I love her. She's a Black OBGYN in Oakland. And she was like, I'm going to call your therapist because I don't think you're okay. And if that's okay with you. And I said, okay, that's fine. And she was like, I'm going to pay for like 5 sessions because I know that's like an issue for you. So let me do that. And I really thought it was okay. And then when I got to her waiting room, I fell apart. Like just knowing I was about to get help, I realized that I was falling apart. And, you know, I realized, like you're saying about the color yellow, like I have a startle reflex on the left side because he ambushed me on the left side. You know what I mean? So if I'm in my car and somebody were to knock on the window, like out of proportion with the situation. And I didn't know that until I started to really like process that night and what it did to me. So yeah, I mean, I really did try to script a whole different life, and I decided I was just going to write around this in my own life story. And it was devastating for this like thing to happen. And then when Oprah backed out, it was literally my worst case scenario because my whole fear in doing this was that the Black community would say I was a traitor to Black men. And that's exactly what 50 Cent and Russell said to Oprah. And then she exited for whatever other reasons. But in the middle of that, I mean, I was literally in the fetal position for 3 days. And then we all got on the plane and we went to Park City, Sherry, Salai, and I. And we stood there with no distributor, with no Oprah Winfrey. And we got a standing ovation. And while I would never in a million years have wished that on any of us, I know for me, that made me so much stronger. I mean, I realized it was exactly 2 years after the story came out in the New York Times. I was like, my God, I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago. I'm good. I don't need Oprah Winfrey. Just like I thought I didn't need Clive Davis anymore when I stayed with L.A. Reid and then I got harassed and like crumbled. I was like, you know what? I don't need to hide behind anybody but myself. And I could stand right here with my sisters and our truth. And we are enough. And that's really what I would say to any survivor watching. You are enough. You and your story and your truth. That's all you need. That's all you need to move on.
Yeah. And first, I want to thank you so much for your time, because I know how difficult this could be. And I you know, I struggled a little bit with asking you at first, because I was like, I don't want to be that person. I'm not that person. But, you know, I think like we're such in this heightened moment too of everything that is also going on. So you know, you're on the record, literally. It premieres last week on HBO Max, 2 days after George Floyd is killed. And then I'm sure you're dealing with your children and maybe protesting and all of this. And it's just a lot, you know. It gets to the point where you're like, man, you know, how do Black women keep surviving, but not surviving? Like, now, how do we thrive? Like, I hate that whole thing when you survive. Yeah, okay, well, most people can survive. You know, you'll physically, mentally fight back, but then how do we thrive? Like, are we stuck in this moment, all of this happening? What has been, you know, as we close out, because thank you again for your time, and we're getting so many great comments, and people are so appreciative of you really digging deep. Like today, how do you feel when you get up and you're like, not only is this movie coming out, then as a Black woman, I also have Black children, and I'm in gentrified Brooklyn and George Floyd and all this madness
right now. Exactly.
You know, and obviously New York City people are the worst protesters ever, according to our Democratic mayor. But how do you feel today?
You know what? I feel hopeful. I feel that there is something happening. I feel that as long as we have access to social media, and, you know, all of these platforms are always at risk when they realize that they can be used in a subversive way to challenge the status quo. But what we've got right now is social media that has given us a way to speak out and to aggregate our voices and to find each other and to build community without having to rely on the hierarchy giving us permission. And I really think that's how the Me Too moment sort of scaled. And I think that's how Black Lives Matter has scaled, and this movement around George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor is scaling. And what I'm hoping is that in this moment of Black liberation, finally, please God, let us get somewhere. Let us gain some ground. Like, you know, let this be a moment where we really, really move forward in tangible, structural ways. That the liberation of Black women is included in the liberation of Black people.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that we have the capacity, and I think because of people like you and programs like this where we have more nuanced conversations, people can start to understand that the police protect and serve the white supremacist patriarchy. So Amy Cooper is good.
Right.
If she wants to call the police on an innocent Black man who's a bird watcher, but she's going to find herself having a serious problem if she calls the police when a white man rapes her. Good luck with that, Amy Cooper, because they're not here to protect you against the patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
But because it's a white supremacist patriarchy that it's protecting and serving, that's the status quo. You can invoke racism because you don't want to put your dog on a leash and potentially get this man killed. So watch yourself, Amy Cooper. Watch yourself, 53% of the white women who voted for Trump, because you're not free. Don't get it twisted. And also, a 75-year-old white man who has the audacity to be at a protest to challenge the status quo on behalf of Black people, well, he's not free either, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is the status quo. The issue is the unjust, oppressive, exploitative status quo. And it's most apparent in the way it's killing Black people, because that's the paradigm, and we are the bottom of this paradigm. And so let's absolutely center that, please, please. But that includes Black women.
Right.
And that includes all of the ways that the bodies of Black people have been plundered in this country. It's not one or the other. You know, one thing that is in the film, I don't know if it's specifically the condemned cell, but Black women were raped. The enslaved Black women and adolescent girls were raped by the slave traders, not just because they were sadistic, not just because they wanted to break our spirits. That was an economically good thing to do, because you could create a bonus asset in the form of a slave.
Mm-hmm.
That is literally not true for any other group of women that I'm aware of, that for hundreds of years, raping you was a good business decision. So let's be clear about that. So while they're doing that, the Black men who wanted to defend us were put in a condemned cell to die. A little cell, like the size of the space under a dining room table, no light, no ventilation, scratch marks on the wall when I went on the tour, to stop our own men from protecting us as Black women and girls from sexual violence. And what I would say is the condemned cell now lives on in our minds and in our community, where we don't even see the suffering of our own women and girls. We've got to unlock the condemned cell. We have to see the suffering that we are inflicting upon each other, not because we don't love each other, but because we do. And also because we are already walking around trying to get free with somebody's foot on our neck. The last thing we can afford to do is to be weak internally. So we have to heal internally in order to get the foot off of all of our necks. And I'm hoping that this is a moment where we can see the intersection of rape culture and white supremacist culture and move forward.
Yeah. So, Drew, let me just ask you this one last question. Have you been in contact with Miss Winfrey, Oprah, or any of her people?
Never. No. I heard that she loved the film. She saw a rough cut of the film about a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago now. And I cried tears of joy. I heard she was joining as the executive producer. I knew she was working closely with the filmmakers, which they knew was important to me, because I very clearly told them I was anxious about white filmmakers telling this story. So I was very happy that she was working with them closely. I was told she loved the film and was thrilled, and that Harpo submitted it to Sundance. And then the next thing I knew, she was gone. And, I also heard she said there were inconsistencies in my story. She said that in the New York Times. I've never been told what they are. I have no idea what she's talking about. I wish she'd ask me, because I'd be happy to address any questions she had, because there are none. There was a story in the New York Times that nobody has refuted in 2.5 years. Apple vetted it. HBO Max has now vetted it. The New York Times has vetted it. Harpo vetted it. The filmmakers vetted it. I don't know what she's talking about. I really don't. It's heartbreaking. I have admired that woman for as long as I knew she basically existed. I still do. I wish I knew what she was referring to, but I don't know. I have to just let that one go, because I have no control over it.
Yeah. And, I always think, this idea of even vetting and what that actually means when Black women in the best of circumstances, including telling your doctor you feel pain and they don't believe you, are not believed, and we believe you. We believed you when you said it, we believed all those women, and I'm sure so many other women that might have had similar experiences that will probably never speak out. Because even in 2020, we live in this intersectional moment, right? But look, even today, I was getting texts, mostly from men, who were like, George Floyd is being buried today. I was like, oh, but I see you're interviewing Drew Dixon. I'm like, right, because we're intersectional. And we can talk about George Floyd, and I can talk to Drew Dixon in the same day, and I can talk to my daughter later and whatever. Like this, I'm like, that's exactly what Kimberly Crenshaw talks about. But it's always that Black women always have to, when I say Black, I racialize myself as Black, so let me be very clear. African American women have to always diminish themselves all the time. And then you have to be everybody's mother. Like, even the fact that Breonna Taylor, it's like, but don't forget women. Okay, right, Breonna Taylor. And then you're like, no, the 9 million more women. But this idea that only do African American women always have to diminish yourself, then you're supposed to take care of everybody on top of it.
I love Black men. I just would like for them to love me back.
Right.
Please.
Right. The same way. Like,
I love them to the ground. I love Black men to the ground. Please love me back. I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Other than wait 22 years to say what happened. So that is hurtful. And thank you for doing this anyway.
Well, thank you. No, thank you for your time. I've had you on very long. I know we're all like zoomed out, tapped out, trapped in, go out, there's helicopter, this is, and so I just really want to thank you first for trusting me and Tandi, our producer, to have you on. And, I tell you, I didn't watch the documentary again because there's this moment where I just want to go through the TV and literally snatch him up and slap him. And I'm just like, if I had magic powers, what would I do right now? I'm like, I'd be wherever the hell you're in Bali or Thailand. I don't even know what, but it's that smirk, and it's just that look. And it's actually like the smirk that Derek Chauvin had when he was killing George Floyd.
And that's what I want people to see. It's about use of power. He's emulating the white supremacist slave traders who raped Black women. He's copying them, and he's anti-Black. Look at the women he prefers. I'm just keeping it real. What does that tell you? Look at how we all look. And then he got a little more power and he started adding white women. That's what I think. That's what I think. I mean, what do I know? I'm not a therapist. But he's it's like Animal Farm. So we used to be raped by the white slave traders and the slave owners, and now Russell Simmons is so powerful that he gets to do it to us too? And somehow he's the Black hero? No.
Or he's the quote, because we know we don't use this word to refer to ourselves who are survivors, but he makes himself a very good victim.
Yes.
Yeah. A very good victim. Yeah. And we can't allow that. Well, Drew, I want to thank you. And in fact, I'm just going to close out the show here with everybody. First and foremost, thanks everybody for listening and tuning in to Disrupt the Chaos. Tomorrow, we're going to be back with Christian Smalls, who is one of the young Black organizers who was fired at Amazon for organizing. But this week, Amazon is having a Black Lives Matter week. And I'm like, well, wow. And they hoisted the red, black, and green flag in front of their headquarters in Seattle. I'm like, you love Black people, but you're firing young Black men and women for organizing for a livable wage. All right, I guess that's where we are. And really, the last thing, people want to ask what we want from the police. I know that we are asking for defunding, decarceration, and abolishment of the police. And, that's where some of us are. We're not going back to no more reform stuff. So, Drew, thank you so much for being with me. I hope to see you soon and be able to hug you. And I'll try to jog with you, but I don't think I can keep up. But that's going to be what I do when I go to Brooklyn. I'm going to meet you and I'll probably walk behind you, but I am so appreciative. I'm so glad you're like with your children and you're in the space that you are now. And you know,
my cats were here for the whole. There's one. They literally came and joined.
I think on behalf of all of us in hip hop culture, all of us that love Black women and say we care, thank you. Thank you for loving us too and doing what you've done for us. And the film ends with you and that young sister.
Yeah.
You're now helping her create her career so she doesn't have to go through what you did.
Her single's gonna be like on iTunes and Spotify in like a week.
Okay, let us know so we can. Thank you for your time, Drew. Thank you so much. I appreciate and love you, sis. I'm gonna see you soon. Stay safe out there.
Love you back. Stay safe.
All right. Yeah, everybody, we're gonna end here. I mean, there's not much more to say. Everybody stay safe, stay up, stay healthy. Please share this. You know, I have to say, I'm going to tell Tondi right now, this is the most technical difficulties I always had. I don't know if it's the ABC of policing or what the hell. There's 2 helicopters flying Albany right now. I don't know what's happening, but I'm glad everybody stuck through. What we're going to do is we're going to take this and edit it and make it super clean and upload it. But for everybody who stayed with us through the technical difficulties, thank you. And again, Drew gave us so much time. So I really just want to thank her again. And everybody go to HBO Max. I think it's streaming live. If not, please go watch On the Record. Listen to all these incredible Black women. And I'm going to shout out Joan Morgan because, you know, if it wasn't for her, we as hip hop feminists or hip hop womanists, we wouldn't even we'd be erased a lot more. But Drew, thank you. Thank you for your bravery. Thank you for sharing with us. Tondi, thank you, our producer. Everybody out there, like I said, stay safe. We'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. when we're going to have Christian Smalls, the organizer that was fired in Staten Island by Amazon for organizing Black workers, brown workers, all workers there in those warehouses. So everybody stay safe. See you in the whirlwind. Thank you for joining.
They don't want you to know the truth.